I'd like to thank everyone for coming today to the Staten Island Printmakers Printmaking Forum. And this is a grant that I received from Staten Island Arts with public funding from the New York Department of Cultural Affairs. And the grant enabled us 15 different printmakers from Staten Island to present their work in the gallery and then have this printmaking forum. And I just want to give a small background to printmaking. It's in the brochures. I guess people aren't as familiar with printmaking, generally speaking, as like, let's say, sculpture or painting, because like you see in printmaking, you see the piece, but you don't know what goes into making it. You just see it on the paper or on the fabric, and you think, oh, it's a drawing that was done directly or a painting done directly on that piece. You don't realize, many people don't realize, it is actually like a transfer of something that you've done on a plate onto the paper. Whereas like when you look at painting or sculpture, you see a sculpture, you see, oh, it's made of wood, it must have been carved. You know, you see a painting, you can see the paint. So today we're going to discuss what printmaking is, which is essentially we're making a plate and putting ink on it, and then the plate is transfers the image using a press or light pressure with a spoon or baron to either paper or fabric to create the images. And there's a variety of ways of printmaking, and we're very lucky today to have some of the, not to say some of, the best artists on Staten Island here, who will also be printmakers. So I just want to make sure, and in each of the artists here pretty much has a different technique that they will discuss today, and we'll find out more. So with that being said, thank you the panel, and thank you all, and let's begin. So I'd like to go around and have everyone introduce themselves, say your name, and point out where your art is in the gallery, and say what your specialty is. So we'll start with Bill.
My name is Bill Murphy. There are 3 of my prints right there. Black and white prints. Oh, a specialty. Well, those are various forms of what is called intaglio, which includes hard ground etching and aquatint and dry point. And I also do lithography and monoprints. That's probably it, I guess.
And Phyllis?
I'm Phyllis Featherstone, and my work is sort of in the middle of the room over there. And on the bottom left, I have an etching, which I did a few years back. I don't do that process much anymore these days because I've found some quicker methods. So I also do lithographs, and I have 3 of them there, the lighthouse, and then the one next to it, and then the one on the top left. Those are lithographs, and on the top right, I have a linocut.
Hi, Lenny Librizzi, and I do mezzotints, which is a technique done on a copper plate, inked and then run through a press. And right by the door are my 6 mezzotints.
My name is Marie McDonnell, and I have these 3 pieces right here. And 2 of the pieces on either side are solar plates and solar etching. And the piece in the middle is a combination of solar printing and collagraph printing that were stitched together.
My name is Susan Grabel, and I do collagraph prints and collages. And the 2, the one with the big white frame over there and the one next to it, those are mine.
My name is Diane Matyas, and I did these little elephants, and then there's a monkey behind there. The monkey is a lithograph, very formal lithograph on a stone, made many years ago, and these are very recent, and they're called gelatin prints, and so it's sort of a new oddball method of making a monoprint, which means you get one of each. They can never repeat one. You only get one, whereas most printmaking you think of as being multiples.
Oh, thank you. Okay, now my next question is, no pun intended, what drew you to printmaking, and how did you learn the art? Just like a brief synopsis, Bill?
What drew me to printmaking? Drawing drew me to printmaking.
Now, nobody else can use that joke.
So I was a student at the School of Visual Arts, and because I had taken and shown a proficiency in photography, I didn't have to take that in the second semester of my first year, and I was allowed to take an elective, which I chose to take printmaking. And I had a teacher by the name of Jack Sonnenberg, and he saw how I drew, and he handed me a couple of these plates, and he said, "Here, why don't you do some etchings?" I had been doing embossed found objects on the street, rusted metal beer cans that had been flattened, and I had been printing them. And he said, "Why don't you try drawing them?" So I thought, wow, that's pretty interesting. So I grounded a plate, made an etching needle out of a sewing needle and a pencil, and that was it. And that's when I started doing those, and it really, that's 50 years ago, and I've been continuing since. And along the way, I began to, as I said, I've been doing stone lithography. I've done probably 20-25 stone lithographs, and I also work in monoprints, which is all of that. To me, printmaking is very close to drawing. Now, I know not everybody might agree with that, but for me, printmaking is an extension of drawing. And there's all kinds of prints here, and they go in all kinds of different directions, which is logical. But for me, it's really close to drawing. And monoprints in particular are kind of a hybrid between drawing, painting, and printmaking. So anyway, I don't want to go off.
A monoprint is a one-off print. You paint or use a water-soluble crayon on a plate, and you can run it through a press, but once you print it, it's gone. The image is gone. And you could sometimes run it through again and get what they call a ghost print, but it's a one-off print, generally speaking, where oftentimes a lot of these other prints are, you could make what they call an edition. You make a series of pictures, you number them, and there's an edition made. So it's kind of a varied form. Anyway, I'm sorry to, anyway.
Okay, I studied art at American University in Washington, D.C. I ended up being a painting major, and I also did printmaking, and I also did drawing. And I think probably part of what drew me to printmaking, I think, was the process. I've just enjoyed, I don't know how to explain that, but there's just a real joy in the process. And so, don't do as much drawing now, but I still do painting and printmaking.
I think many of us agree that it's the process
It
that we
is.
enjoy.
It is.
All the lead up that comes to making the actual final print.
Right.
It's all the background work that you really don't see, but you see the print.
Right.
Anyway, Lenny?
So about 20 years ago, I wanted to take some kind of art class, and very close to here is Art Lab, and my house is also very close to here. And so they offered a wide variety of types of art classes. I think everything from painting and sketching to printmaking. And I looked at some of the instructors, and the printmaking instructor was Herman Zaga, who has since passed away. And I, looked him up, and he was a pretty much world-renowned printmaker here on Staten Island. So I said, oh, let me sign up for his class. So I tried signing up for his class one of the trimesters. I think we had 3 or 4 sessions a year. And it took me 3 or 4 chances before I finally got into the class. It was such a popular class. And so I learned from Herman, and he basically taught all the different techniques that have been mentioned, And I tried doing a few things and finally settled on the mezzotints. And so once I started doing those, that's it. That's all I do now.
May I add a note at this point? Oh,
Yes, of course.
I also studied with Herman, and he taught the method of lithography that I use now.
Oh, really?
Which is not using a stone, but using a polyester plate, which is like a piece of plastic.
And that's how you did the lighthouse,
Yeah,
right?
that's how I did all.
Oh, well, I didn't realize all of them.
Yeah, all.
Yeah. Anne Marie?
So I also studied in college art and took printmaking, but I have a studio at Snow Carver. So this is also another Herman story. I knew that Herman was a master printmaker who was working downstairs from my studio, and I said, this is crazy. I just wanted to study with him. He was a printmaker. I mean, listen, I was not, that's really why I'm there. So I started studying with Herman, and now the mezzotint was not for me. Herman was a master at the mezzotin, but we of course tried different techniques, and Herman introduced me to solar printing because he had taken the classes with Diane Weldon, who actually sort of invented a particular method with this particular plate, which we can talk about later. But the collagraph is a much more sculptural type of process, and Susan and I are both sculptors, so it sort of makes sense that we would be drawn to a much more sculptural, the sculptural process of creating the mat board, which is the base for your collograph print, and you incise into it, you build it up, you can put things on it, so it's a very, so that is what draws me to it. What keeps me there is the experimental nature of printmaking. And that is what...
And the company.
And the company, of course.
A lot of us print together.
We have fun. That's true. But it is very, for me, it's always been it's you don't always happy with what you get out when the print comes out, but there's I started as an abstract painter in my life as an artist, and I'm always going back to abstraction in a sort of, you might not guess that, but it's true. And this allows that. Printmaking process allows experimentation.
Susan?
Yes, so I'm primarily a sculptor, and over the years I've tried different kinds of printmaking. Years ago in California I did some lithography, with the stones, and silk screen, but mostly I didn't do much printmaking for many, many years. And a number of years ago I was working in cast paper, doing work on aging women's bodies, and I was casting, having a relief sculpture, and I was crushing them, actually, because I was working with Jenni, and she suggested, why don't you try crushing them? So I did, and Herman Zager, another Herman Zager story, Herman Zager happened to come to our studio, to our house. He was helping George with something, and he looked at the crushed paper, and he said, those would make great collagraphs. So I was teaching those years in Chautauqua in the summers, and I was about to go up to Chautauqua for another session, and I said, great, that's what I'll do this year, I'll work on collagraphs. And so I did that there, and then I came back and worked with Herman at the Art Lab on the collagraphs. And what I loved about the collagraphs, well, I mean, it's very sculptural, it's very, very highly embossed, and then just discovering printmaking and the overlay of the inks, which I love, and color. I discovered color, because my sculptures were largely, I worked in clay for many years, and my sculpture was kind of muted, and when I went into paper, it was kind of muted, and all of a sudden with the prints, it was like, hey, there's color here, I can use color. And so that started like me in a whole other thing, and just, of course, enjoying the process. And I did a lot of prints at Art Lab and a Noble collection too, because they have a larger press. And then after that, actually, I have studied some more at Art Lab. I studied with Sage. I did some linocuts and woodcuts. So I continued that. And with Herman, we worked on the pronto plates. So I was doing some of that. But the collagraph, I think, is like my most successful printmaking adventure.
I like how the two sculptors were drawn to the same thing simultaneously. And Diane?
So the first prints I noticed around me, besides in my parents' house of repros and things, were a series of Kathy Kowitz's lithos that were on a friend's wall. I mean, they were real. I was a kid. I just would stare at them for a long time. They were so powerful. I didn't know what they were. I thought they were drawings or ink drawings. And then years later, I lived in Austria, and I went to the Albertina, and I saw Dürer. And I was like, what is this? You know, rabbits and things. And then later on, I finally went to art school, and I took printmaking, and it was Rembrandt. So it was like, look how you can carve into that metal and make it change. And, you know, the drawing part of it, like Phil said, you know, is so important to me. So those are and the fact is that at the time I was studying art, when you went to painting class, they didn't teach you anything. They just had you stand there and paint without teaching you any process or anything. There was no talk about how to mix a palette and how to create your stretchers. It was just like, go make it up, kids. And I was like, this is college. I actually wasn't paying for it, but I thought you should get more than your money's worth. And so I went to the basement and studied printmaking because there was so much to learn and so much teaching going on.
Yeah, you can't just wing it.
It's interesting. I had a very similar experience with painting in college.
Maybe that's changed.
I hope it's changed.
Well, my next question, I hope this is not like, well, anyway, can you describe the types of printmaking, like your specialty, your printmaking specialty, and just a brief description of like the technique that you use, because we do have a variety of techniques of the different artists here. So I guess, do we go in the same order, or I might as well start, Bill?
Say that again?
I guess, sorry. What
Techniques?
technique,
Okay,
yeah, just
technique.
describe a little bit
Well,
about your
first of all,
process.
I can't talk about printmaking without mentioning my favorite quote about printmaking, which is by John Taylor Arms, the American etcher, who said that printmaking is both the most aristocratic and the most democratic of mediums. Meaning, aristocratic, you need a lot of things to make a print. You need a lot of supplies to make a print. You have to know how to make a print. On the other hand, it's very democratic in that you can just give them away after you print them. Or you can sell them for $10. You can do anything you want. And so you can get them out, as many people, Mexico has a long heritage of woodcuts, in a very public way. Anyway, so my own technique, I would say, I'll limit it to intaglio, which is basically what I call hard ground etching, although there are other forms of it. And basically, it's based on the idea of taking metal and etching lines into that metal. And the way that that is done is to first coat, whether you're using zinc or copper, with what is considered an acid-resistant ground. And wherever you draw into this, in any number of different ways, and you can make all kinds of marks on this plate, wherever you expose that metal, and then you put it into some form of corrosive, either a ferric chloride or a nitric acid bath, there'll be a chemical reaction and there will be lines created. Those lines will hold ink. So when ink is rubbed in and put through the press with a lot of pressure on it and a piece of damp paper, the paper will soak up whatever lines have been inked on that plate. Now that's a very broad explanation of what etching is, and there's many derivations of that that are included in intaglio, and I won't go into every one, but dry point, aquatint, mezzotint, they're all considered forms of intaglio.
I think they're all in the brochure too.
Yeah, I'm sure that this is all out there, so I'm not going to.
You said it better than I did, though.
You know, it's interesting because really etching is a hands-on thing. It's hard to talk about this. It would be much easier to show. I think once you show, without saying any words at all, people get it very quickly, the process, or something.
Okay, polyester plate lithography, which is probably what I do mostly, except for the linocuts. I create my image on the computer, and I print the image on a plastic plate using my printer, my very expensive new printer that I just had to buy. And I then,
That's the aristocratic part of printmaking.
I then ink it, and I run it through a printing press, and I either do proofs for my earlier prints, and then I continue to use inking and water to build up the ink on the plate until I'm satisfied with it, and then I print on good paper. Okay, that's that one. And linocuts, you cut into, you get a plate, a linoleum plate or some similar plate, and you cut it, you transfer a design to it using, you do a drawing, and then you use tracing paper and you transfer the design to the plate using a pencil. And then once you have, the way I do it is once I have the pencil drawing it, then I take a marker and I make the lines darker so I can really see it better. And then the parts you want to stay white, you dig out with the cutter. And the parts you want to hold the ink, you leave alone. And then you do proofs using a printing press. And then you do your final print that way.
Thank you. Lenny?
I'm gonna take Bill at his word and do a little show and tell, because I also feel like he did a very good explanation of how the plate holds the ink and then gets transferred to the paper. But I think for people to see what a plate looks like and the tools that are used, and everybody can come and look at this stuff after, but this is a mezzotint plate. No chemicals or acids are used in the process. It's all done mechanically with hand tools. And it's kind of hard to even see the image.
Yeah.
And
You want
this,
me to hold it for you?
oh, sure. And this is what the image turns into after that gets inked, run through the press, and then
I'm just gonna
You
take
get
the liberty
I'll have my
showing,
assistant
because,
here.
yeah, I'm gonna be the assistant here, because this is an amazing process,
It
and
is.
when I said that it's not for everybody, I raised my hand for that one. Because tell
This
us
is
about
a-
this.
So this is a rocker. I have two of them, and one of them is Colman decided he's never going to rock another plate again. So he gave me
Because I
his,
can't listen to Cecilia Bartoli forever.
it depends on what music you listen to while you work. But anyway, this is a rocker. It looks like it's a sharp edge, but it's actually many little points. And photographers talk about pixels in your photographs. These rockers actually put a lot of tiny little points into the plate, and that creates, by rocking the plate, that creates a surface that the first time you ink it, if you've rocked it well and properly, is going to be jet black. Then you need to use some other tools, primarily a burnisher and some form of scraper. This is one of Herman's tools that I inherited. But various tools to basically bring the image out from that black that you first printed, or that's first embossed on here. The burnisher will flatten the burrs, and the scraper will scrape away some pieces of metal, and then that creates the halftones. Mezzotint in Italian, mezzotinto, means halftones. Jenny, you have a question?
Could you explain perhaps a plate that size, how long it took you first to rock it?
I was a prisoner.
Yeah, you're, he's in
And then
prison,
to bring
yes.
out the images.
Yeah, that's why a number of my plates are mini prints, 2 inches by 2 inches. And I know Herman used to have a number that he would quote. It takes me, 2 minutes to rock 1 square inch. So, yeah, rocking is the kind of thing you have to sort of start and stop, and takes a little bit of time. I never really calculated the hours that went into it, but it's a lot of time. And actually, I think like probably the most famous modern mezzotinter is Chuck Close, and I don't think he rocks his own plates.
Well, you can also buy pre-rock
Free rock
plates.
plates, or buy a machine that actually does the rocking.
But what is the difference? I mean, what can someone who's a mezzotint artist look at a plate and say, oh, well, that is
They do.
that is not a
Hand-rocked.
hand-rocked plate.
I don't think you can tell, really.
Okay. See,
No,
that's-
they do, because I've talked to, I have a friend, Craig McPherson, who is a mezzotint artist, and he did a famous image of Yankee Stadium at night. It's in the Metropolitan Museum. And he told me he spent 500 hours preparing the plate. 500, that would be for a year, 10 hours a week of rocking.
Yeah,
I
it
mean,
takes
because
a long time.
this is what it is. It's that wrist action that you see, and if you've ever watched anybody do it, and you're going to demo later, or
I
no?
can show
But I mean,
people later.
it's like this, and I have that image of Herman just doing that, and then you do it on the other side. So it's not just both; you have to do it cross hatchet. So you don't just do it on one side. So
Actually, you
different
do it
directions,
in
right?
at least 8 different directions.
That's what 500.
And then his is, probably he did 12 different directions or 16.
And then how many states you have?
Right, so then, you can print that initially rocked plate if you want a black piece of art. And then, when you start doing your image, initially you don't want, you feel like, oh, I can't go too, can't work too much because I'll take too much away and then I'll have to start all over again, or it'll ruin the plate. So your first images, once you have something that you can sort of see on a plate, usually do what's called a proof, and that one is usually very dark and not very detailed, but that gives you the ability to know where you need to do additional work. Like, oh, I have to, really work on this
How
section.
did you get the image on the plate to begin with?
There's a number of ways to do it. Usually I worked from a photograph or a drawing, and then we used this orange stuff. What is that called?
I think it's wood stripper or something.
What is it called, Pat?
I can't remember.
Citrusol, I think is what
Yeah.
it's called.
Yeah, right.
You coat you place the image onto the plate, coat it with this citrusol, and then, and it has to be
It's a special computer, it's a computer image, right? It's like
well,
I mean, not a computer image. It's from the
Xerox.
Xerox machine.
You
Right.
that's what you do on photographs too. I know Herman had an enlarger in his, so I figured out he was using that to get his images onto the plate.
Right, there is a bunch of different ways, but generally we would use the citrusol method. That put that on here with other papers on top, and then run it through the press. And then, if you were lucky, you would get some of the outlines of the images, so you at least have
Right.
something to work
Start
from,
with.
to start from.
Certainly a requirement for this process is tremendous patience,
Mm-hmm.
more than I have.
Well, I think any of the printmaking techniques, because there's some trial and error, and I've often looked at little videos of people doing a print, and there's always this. Once you run it through the press, they pick up the paper very slowly.
The reveal.
And it's a surprise.
Yes.
It could be a great work of art, or it could be that something happened all along the way, and it's a smudge or a slip or something. But the other intaglio techniques that used acid, there were so many variables that I was like, no, that's too complicated. Whether you do the aquatint first, or the hard ground, and then the soft ground, and what. So this is sort of
That's
basic.
it.
It's
That's
basic.
it.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
Absolutely.
But also the plate you have to ink it with your hand. You don't ink it with the roller or anything. You ink it with your hand.
You ink it by hand, and you have to actually clean the
Smooth
print
it up, yes.
with your, so at the end of the day, your whole side of your hand is black,
Right.
whatever color ink you're using.
And sometimes you ink it only one part or another part, and then when you see your prints, it's not quite even. So,
It's not what you
Yeah.
expected, yes. I feel like I'm taking up too much of your time, but
No, I mean, mezzotint is, you represent mezzotint.
so afterwards, I can, show you more closely if anyone's interested, all this stuff.
So I brought in a plate from the collagraph that I have here in the exhibition. And so this is just made with board, mat board, cut out, and then there are two pieces of mat board glued together. And basically what I created the lines with is gesso. I just built the gesso up by taping and putting the gesso on, taking it off. And these things here, which is the leaves or the flowers, were also done with gesso. And this is rope that I attached to the piece. So that's the good thing about this kind of method. You can see why it's very sculptural, because you're building things up, and then you're incising in. In this particular case, I didn't actually incise into it. I didn't do that in this one. But you can, in other pieces that I've done, you do. And then you just cover it with, polymer so that it is a barrier for when you put on the oil-based inks. And this particular piece here, you'd have to look very closely to see the flowers, because I didn't really put a distinction when I was inking it. And I also cut it. So it's smaller than the actual piece. And then I stitched it. So I think that aspect of it interests me. I mean, Herman, many of us here, not only know Herman, but studied with Herman. Herman was par excellence printmaker, and we were, and teacher, but we were always, there sort of fighting the boundaries. And yet he was also very curious, and that's why he was the one that introduced me and many of us to different techniques. And the other technique that I've used is this plate, which is the solar plate. And the solar plate is, Dan Weldon actually invented this type of plate. And I know Jenni, who's in the show, studied with him at a workshop this summer, so you could actually talk to her about that too. But Herman went to one of his workshops, and he came home with this technique, came back home to Art Lab with this technique. So it's a steel background with a polychrome surface to it. It's a photographic method. So when you get your plate sent to you, it has a sheet on it And that sheet protects the light-sensitive surface. So when you take off that plate, you have to be ready to put your acetate image on. So I use sort of photographic images because I also do photography, and the photography that I chose to do was still life photography. My interest in flowers, and I know you're kind of going to get to, your interest in not only your technique, but on, who are you as a printmaker in terms of what you're going to do with it. But I've done photographs, and I've chosen to translate that into printmaking. So when you take the surface off, your image is already going to be transferred to a acetate printed on a printer. So a piece of acetate, very thin acetate. As soon as you take it off, you're going to put that on, the acetate, onto your light-sensitive plate, and you're going to make sure that it's pressed down with a piece of glass over it. And because it's light-sensitive, you're going to expose it to the sun. So I take it outside into the sun. You can also do this on a light box if you would like, because you can do both, but I've always used the sun. And you expose it to for me, it's like 2 minutes of light. I bring it back in, and then I put it into a water bath. So it's really very much like a photographic process. You're having it etched into the plate. It's a photograph, and then you agitate the water for a period of time. You take it out, and you use a hairdryer, and then you basically let it bake in the sun for like 20 minutes or an hour, depending. I usually wait the next day before I print. And then you're going to use it as a plate, any plate that anyone else has used here. You're going to put your ink. I use an oil-based ink. You put your ink on, you card it off as much as you can, and then you try to get it to the point where you can put it on the etcher's press, put your paper on, roll it, and take it off. So this is one of the pieces that I've brought in, and I will have them in the back. You're welcome to, just come and look at the plates, and that's it. Thank you. Susan?
So my process with these collagraphs is it's a complicated process, as everybody has. That's what we all obviously like process. So I make a sculpture out of clay. I make a plaster mold of it. I press handmade paper pulp in the mold, take it out, crush it, glue it onto museum board, coat it with with a surface, and then I ink it up and put it in the press. So the inking up is like you card it on with like just a piece of cardboard. You cover the whole plate with ink, and then you wipe and you wipe and you wipe.
But you seal the plate, right? Do you seal the plate?
Yeah, you
Yes.
seal it with like a what do you seal it with? Some kind of some kind of a thing. You seal it so that otherwise the ink will just be absorbed into the paper. So you seal it, and then you card on the ink, and then you wipe and you wipe and you wipe, and then you put it through the press. I do a lot of overlays, so like I'll put it through the press, and then also because I hate to waste ink, so I always make a ghost. A ghost, which means that I put it through the press once, and then I put it through the press again without putting any more ink on, and whatever residue of the ink is, you still have that. So I do that a lot. And then I do a lot of overlays with, let's say, with more than one image, or do the image again in a different color and do overlays. Since I love what happens, especially when you have ghosts, just the residue of the inks and just seeing the inks overlaying each other, it's very exciting, in terms of that color. So, what else? I think that's about it. That's what I do. I also then I also like cut them out and collage them. Again, because I hate to rate things, and like a lot of times, you do a print and there's a part that's really great, and the whole thing doesn't work as a work of art. So I cut them out and I collage them and make another thing out of it.
Oh, thank you. Last but not least.
I just want to say one thing, that everyone here has talked about these crazy processes, each one individual and each one invented differently, and I think that to remind our audience that a printmaker is not someone who's taking their picture and just reproducing it. It's not like making a reproduction of a famous painting. It becomes its own language, its own thing. It's an artwork in its own right, and it has its own aspects. And that's what I look for as a printmaker. I don't want to see your reproduction of your painting. That's not a print, because it has to be, the intention is I'm making a print today.
Well,
And
you're
that
using a
has-
medium.
And I'm using this particular, whatever these things are, and I think that's unique to printmakers, that is always reinventing. So getting to, I have a lithograph and I have these gelatin prints, and they're in, lithography was invented by an artist sort of, by mistake. Oh my God, what happened with this stone, and it made this chemical reaction that made an image, and then it was taken, the French, basically, they were advertising with it. And then artists found it again, and artists find something, a technique, whether it's computers today or something else. You take something and you're like, I'm intentionally making art with this method. And then it became lithography as we know it. The French lithographers were creating so much. And they were taking something that was commercial use primarily and then bringing it back to art.
I think it was like the origin of graphic design, or the early
Yeah.
lithographs were posters advertising like the Moulin Rouge and all the.
Right. You think of Toulouse-Lautrec, but then you go back to the great Japanese. There's so many things we can bounce around in this room with. The looks of all these prints are different, but these things are funny because if I say a jelly print, that sounds so stupid, but it's a gelatin material that was invented fairly recently, and you can go to Michael's and you can buy this thing, and you can basically, what I find, you can go to YouTube and see all these amateur artists. They don't call themselves artists. They're not. They're makers. They're enjoying their life and they're making things, and they're making colorful paper basically with them. So they haven't, perhaps most of them have not gone through art school or learned about drawing or anything. So I said, I'm going to try this, but make it my work somehow. And it was really hard because it didn't have what I have, drawing that I'm used to. But lithography gives you, what etching gives you, you don't have that control. So to add color and to play with something and to find different methods has been really exciting because it was a battle that I was willing to do, but it also didn't require anything caustic, no press was necessary, all these things not necessary. You can do it in your kitchen table.
Well, I would say
You'll have a really messy kitchen table, but you could do it. I'm happy to give a demonstration maybe later in the run of the show. Someone mentioned that I could do a demonstration just to show you what it is, but it's a plate, but it's a rubbery substance, a gelatin-like substance that's made with oil of some sort, and you plop it on your kitchen table and you roll it up with anything. You could do watercolor, you could do acrylic paint, which is the cheapest of things, and is colorful. You could do printmaking ink, you could do anything, draw on it, anything, and it will, and then when you don't have to wet your paper, which is a huge issue. So it's a little bit more like lithography, you're not wetting your paper and having to deal with rubber, crazy paper. And you just plop it down and peel it up, and you get the result offset on the paper. And okay, but now how do you control it? Like, how do you make images with it is the deal. So you can make a lot of crap with it, or you can find a way to manage it, but that's true with any process. Like, you could start out one way and then end up in a different place and make it your own. But, people are just using it to, especially during COVID, it became this big thing because people were home and they needed to do something with themselves. So if you're not a knitter, maybe this will fit you, and you go to Walmart and buy some cheap paint, and you can make printmaking happen.
It's also nice that you could do it at home, like you don't need a press and
Right.
a million different tools.
Right, there's no need for anything like that. So it is unusual in that regard, but it was hard for me to make something I want to see out of it because it just had, it was decorative, very decorative. This work for me is very decorative. So that was like, oh, am I comfortable with that? But if you keep working at it, you'll find a way to tame something into some, try to get something that matters to you. It was my challenge.
Oh, thank Thank you. Well, you know what, I have 2 more questions, but I'm gonna just open it up to like just a few people. I hope this is not going too long. My question is, and I'll ask Susan, how do you choose your subject matter? Because I know you have a specific.
Right, well, I mean, this work came out of, I was doing work on aging women, because I was noticing changes in my own body. And I was also concerned about the way, all the women were portrayed in the media. So I started working on aging women, and then this just, grew out of that. It was just a very organic process.
Diane?
I do animals. I'm always interested in nature and science.
Well, this story behind the elephant.
Well, there's narrative story. So this is what I call the New George elephant, and that is a real happening that happened back in the early 20th century, that an elephant got loosed from Coney Island, from Luna Park, and swam across the Narrows and ended up in New York, and that's weird, that's a weird thing, and people don't seem to know that story. So I'm always looking for narrative stories that depict animals in our human spaces in order to tell our stories about who we are. So that's what I do.
And Phyllis?
Oh, boy.
You could skip it if you need to, because I have one more question I could ask.
Okay, I'm gonna skip it.
Okay, Lenny?
Well, most of my work is either some kind of structure. Usually it's falling apart. So I guess that, there's a meaning there. And a lot of the other stuff I do is nature related. And a couple of animals, and the one, or fish, and the one kind of fun story, there's a mezzotint up there of an octopus, and I call it predictor, and I was told that's spelled wrong, but by somebody. But anyway, the story behind that was done when the World Cup was in South Africa. In one of the towns, I don't know if it was Cape Town or Johannesburg, there was a bar. Of course, there's other bars involved in their sports events. And the bar had a giant fish tank with an octopus in it. And the bar owners would put the logos of each of the teams playing in each game into the fish tank, and the octopus would pick the winner almost every time. So I thought of the octopus as a predictor.
Oh, thank you. And then my last question, before we open it up to questions from the audience, is what do you enjoy about printmaking? I'll ask Bill. But what is the most exciting thing about it? Okay, we're going to end on a positive note, like the enjoyment of it.
What do I enjoy about printmaking? I'm not, I don't like to print very much, to be honest.
Maybe I shouldn't ask that.
I kind of like making a plate. What I really like, what interests me in printmaking is no different than drawing or painting, which is the process of finding the picture. And it's been like what I've struggled with my whole life, which is, being called by something in terms of wanting to make, to say something about something I see. It's usually something I see. Could be a landscape, it could be a figure. It doesn't really come from thought, it doesn't really come from the mind. It's something, the first question you asked was, how do you pick your subjects? But I don't feel like I do. I feel that I'm picked by the subject pretty much most of the time. And I really enjoy that.
So it's like the sorting hat from Harry Potter.
So that's the thing that I really like. And whether it's a drawing or a watercolor, I just try to find the medium that's the most appropriate for what I'm trying to, what wants to come out into the world, what I want to say, I guess, So I guess that's it, I guess it's really no different than drawing or painting. It's that finding of an image, and the whole wrestling with that, with all the possibilities of how to manifest this image into the world. That's it sounds kind of highfalutin, but it's really that's it. You know, I think so.
Thank you. And Phyllis?
I have to agree with Bill. It's the creative process. It's something in you that you have to express.
And Anne Marie?
Well, I think I'm gonna go back to the other question then. Because my piece in the middle is called Settled Law Until It's Not. Now, I did not start out with that as the theme when I did the piece, because it's a combination of like my floral piece and this other piece, but obviously it was what was happening in the world. And so the final has really almost nothing to do with how I started the piece or even my concept. So it was like more like something that you were saying about how, you know, even artwork just can change by just a title. I mean, when I did the flower pieces that are called Ukraine 1 and Ukraine 2, that wasn't in my idea that that is what I was going to name those pieces. But by naming them that, it has sort of changed what it is. Now, those are based on photographs that I created, and my whole process of photography using flowers, you know, this was part of the End of the Garden series. So I used my garden as a metaphor, really, for, you know, the world as we, you know, things live, die, and so when I looked at those pieces, which were done at the end before the Ukraine war started, then I used just the watercolor to put the yellow into the flower. It sort of changes it. So in fact, it does come out of something else that doesn't start with what I started with. But the meaning does sort of present itself.
Oh, thank you.
And I enjoy it. Got both questions in.
Thank you, panelists. And now we can open this up to questions. If anyone has questions, there will be a quiz after this. And if you pass, you can get refreshments. But anyway, does anyone have any questions? Oh, Josephine?
With all these different methods of printmaking, which I'm really not familiar with, to be honest, can you only make one print of it? Is that what happens
No.
after your creation?
Depends on what kind of
I don't know if
print
I'm
you have.
understanding that.
The only one that you are limited to one, in my awareness, unless you just choose to make one print, is monoprints, which is monoprint.
This is a monoprint. It's like a one-off print.
But everything else, I mean, I've made 250. I've made editions of 250 from a copper etching plate. Yeah. Usually you have to have it steel faced, which you take the copper plate and you run it through a bath, and it creates a small, very thin layer of steel to protect the plate, so you can make 250 prints. You know, lithos are much more difficult. A stone lithograph is much more difficult. John Noble, Staten Island artist, used to make 300, but sometimes he couldn't get the 300 out of the stone. Much more lithography is to me, a very difficult printing medium.
And there are master printers who worked with those artists, you know,
And
master
you still have the
printers.
same quality from number one?
Well, that's
to
their
number
job,
three?
is to make sure it's the same quality.
Yeah, you create a print called a BAT, which means bon à tirer, which means good to print, and good to pull or something. And that's the print that you supposedly match. Every print, a professional printer or a printmaker wants to match that. Or they don't. I mean, if you look at Rembrandt or Whistler, their prints never matched each other. Very rarely. If you look at Rembrandt, he would experiment with every print. And it would drive the business people of today insane, probably does, because they want a commodity to sell, all the same, And the old printmakers, Rembrandt and Whistler, never, they always were experimenting when they printed.
Thank you.
So you can kind of learn about materials when you do printmaking. Even though this is a metal, it's soft actually, and as Phil said, unless you electroplate it with steel, you can only get 25 to 30 good prints, the same as the first print. And even then, you know, if you don't wipe it exactly the same each time, or if you don't ink it exactly there, you know, put too much ink in one spot and not enough in another, you will get variations.
Yeah, that's what I find, what happened.
Also, I mean, with like collagraphs, it's much harder to get a large, you know, edition. It's also because it's the collagraph that I'm doing. It's it's paper basically, and you print it through the press. A lot of times you lose definition after a while. But also with the collagraphs, what I'm doing is like I'm using it as a way to. I did one edition actually because it was a collage edition of the thing. It was the hardest thing I ever did. Of like 10, like I did 12 plates, 12 copies. It was for a portfolio exchange, so I had to do it. But mostly like when I'm doing the collagraph, so I print an image, but the collagraph is like, in general, the image is not the whole image. Like if you do an etching, you have this plate that has the whole image on it. But what I do is, so I print an image and then I'll print overlays and then I'll do other things with it. I'll cut it up and collage it so that most of them are one-offs really. You know, most of them are one-offs.
Multi-step what you're doing.
Yeah, it's not like the exact same thing. But as I said, there was this one that I did like 12. It's really hard to do it that way.
Because essentially,
It's
in
not
addition,
the same
I'm
kind of
sorry,
thing.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, it's not the same kind of thing as an etching or even as a tension like that.
An edition should technically be everything in the edition. If you pull 20 of a print, every piece should look like the last one. They should all be on the same paper, the same size paper, the same ink. And then if you notice on the ones that are editions, the artist will say, let's say you do 20 identical prints. Any other questions?
Or they don't increase in price.
Yeah,
Right?
I think usually the first numbers are
No, that's
considered.
totally
Oh,
false.
Makes sense?
Yeah, because first of all, today, when you get an edition, you don't know which were printed first. An artist does an edition of 50 or 100 prints.
Okay.
Now, if the print is degrading, you shouldn't be printing it. So you will see a lot of Rembrandts, for instance, that have been retooled. You'll find Whistlers. You'll find valuable prints that people have bought the plates and then have reprinted the Goya. They printed so many of the Goya. They used to sell them at the Prado in Spain. Actual Goya etchings. So it's very hard to know what is an early print. So if it's rich, if it looks really good, if it looks like a strong print, that's great. But today when people do editions, like when I did an edition recently of 100 prints, I couldn't tell you which was done first and which was done last. But you shouldn't be selling them. You shouldn't be putting them out there if it's beginning to break down, whatever the medium is, the plate is that you're using.
Yeah, they just use the idea of I'm getting the first of 100 as a way to ploy to make you pay more. It has nothing to do with what's real. It's just, they make you feel better.
Well, I have a question. What about an artist's proof? What does that mean in terms of editions?
That's what you're basing it, the VAT kind of thing, the artist proof.
If you put something down as an AP over an
Supposedly,
edition,
again, this is totally arbitrary in my opinion, but in the last 75 years, the commodification of art has created this thing. So if you do an edition of 100 prints, then you're allowed to make 10 artist proofs for yourself. I mean, who came up with this? Like, right? I don't think it's in the Bible.
Maybe the printmaking Bible.
Or it's the proof before you get to the DTA. That's the idea, is that, I'm playing with it, I'm retooling it, I'm trying this out, I'm trying this ink, I'm changing this around. So it's a good print, it's interesting, it's an experiment, so I'll call that an artist proof, because it's my proof.
Actually,
just
that should be a
trying.
work proof.
A work.
What Herman's author told me was an AP is once you printed your edition, if you want to do additional prints, you can make them APs.
That's probably, that's what goes
Okay.
kind of thing, but it's the bottom line, yeah.
I mean, you could, I've written them beforehand.
Well, whatever.
The entire
You know,
edition.
yeah. That would make sense, yeah.
You'd have to go to a gallery that's handling an artist and that one edition in order to actually to see the range of quality in an edition. And I suspect that they try to make it very even.
Well, it has to be. It has to be the same. That's the craft is to make it perfect and make it,
Right, well,
The
you know
same.
what breaks down fastest? Mezzotints. Those little fur things.
3 of 3.
And dry points.
Furs.
Are there any other questions? Oh, yes.
Is there any way to make corrections? I mean, with oil paint, we go back over and over again. And once you're finished, I mean, can you go back and make corrections?
Yeah, if I'm working on a etching plate, you can scrape out lines, or you can add lines, I mean, continually add lines, burnish, lighten lines. Yeah, it's a little bit more time consuming than erasing a drawing, but it's basically along the same lines.
Before you get to the final.
Yeah.
Before you
right.
get to the final.
Before you get-
Oh,
But I know
okay.
mezzotint's a little bit harder, right? Because you have.
Well, you can re-rock a section and then re-scrape and re-burnish it.
And
Is
wood
that
cuts, you
all
have
the
to fill in wood.
processing? You know, all the different processes, can you do that? I mean, go back and,
No.
you know, change something?
Lithography,
Yeah.
once you process it, which is on a stone or on a metal plate, once you've processed it, that's the image, and hopefully it holds up so that your ink goes on and continues to go on till the end of your edition. You can then you can go back into the stone, basically it's a chemical process, so you're reopening up the pores of the stone, you're scraping and redrawing, but it shouldn't really, by changing the surface, is not what that science is about. It makes a problematic thing, but you can change it. It's just, why?
Well, I mean, also people like go over with, you can go over with watercolor and make it a one-off.
Yeah.
You know, then it becomes an individual
Dick
thing
I
or
used to do
for the
that a
thing or
lot.
something.
He would draw on his, paint on his prints,
Yeah.
like, and things like that.
But that's why Rembrandt's so good to look at, we were saying Rembrandt, because he just keeps changing the image. You know, Christ coming into,
Being presented.
being presented, that, if you just look at the series, you'll say, it gets dark, it gets light, it gets this, you know, suddenly the light is coming from the left, something, you know, a bird is flying that way, and it's the same plate, but he's drawing
But
it.
that's the genius of Rembrandt, that particular plate that Diane mentions, if any of you know the etching, actually it's largely dry point, it's a large plate, it's called Christ Being Presented to the People. And Hyatt Major, who used to be head of the print department of the Metropolitan Museum, wrote a book about that print, one print, which is how he has this enormous crowd, amazing figures in dry point, looking up at what's happening on this kind of stage, and then in the last state, he just wiped it out. He got rid of all the figures, most of the figures on the ground, and it created this void that the figure of Christ is standing in front of. And his point is, any other artist would be overjoyed to have made this early estate of the plate, but it takes a Rembrandt to understand the deeper emotional and psychological place you can get to by getting rid of the thing that was really so attractive in a way.
Any other questions?
That's a lot.
Oh, Diane?
Yeah, I always love when you go to these, well, I haven't been to them in years, but these auction type things at the hotels, they say, oh, we got the Chagall prints, you know, they're selling for whatever, $1,000. Are those computer printed pretty much, or is that, you know, 12th time they printed it at a different edition or something? Because obviously you're not getting a real Chagall, so.
Right.
They're probably photo free.
Yeah, they're probably
They're digital.
reproduction, they're
Offset
probably
reproduction.
digital reproduction.
Yeah.
I mean, would they have taken his original plates or something and and
You
just
know,
printed them as
No.
another, I don't know.
There, in the 1980s, silkscreen, there were galleries all over the cities, all over, and they were doing silkscreen. I worked in one of these, basically, a camp, like, making, and it was a machine doing it a lot of times, and I would mix the colors, and they would print out thousands, and they were up all over the place, and you buy one of 1,000. And it was just this mill. It was like a puppy mill. It was a print mill, and people were interested in getting something famous or something great. And you know what? I grew up with a picture, reproductions. I learned a lot by having reproductions of great art. But a new print that is clearly being sold as a one of something that's not handmade, to me isn't something I would buy. And it's certainly, if it's a picture that is a painting that was not made as a print, then to me it's not a print. It's just a reproduction, right? So that's how I.
The famous thing is that Salvador Dali used to sign blank pieces of paper
We had them. We had blank pieces.
before they
from
were
Sally.
printed, and this is towards the end of his life, and I guess they figured he might not be around. And so it's like there's a lot of stuff like that in the art world.
We had a lot of blank pieces that were signed by Dali. We were printing up. Yeah, we did.
It's kind of like those cliche ones too, it's a photo and then they might put a couple little things on there and they're still selling those things for a few thousand or whatever. What are the cliche glickies or what they call them?
Glichet print is a computer. It's anything that's printed on a computer printer,
Right.
like taking an original work of art, a drawing or painting, photographing it, and then running it through a computer program and signing it. And I sell mine for $50, but some people sell them for thousands of dollars.
Yeah. And then sometimes it's just paint on top of it or something to do it slightly
You
different.
can do that, add something to it.
Any further questions? Well, I guess not. Well, I'd like to thank the panel of artists that came out today, and I would like to thank all of you for showing up. I thought there would be maybe 2 people here today, so this is like quite shocking.
And before you get up, I think the artist would like to thank Wendy.
Oh,
yes. This show, and by going way above, by putting together the pamphlet, the postcard, by doing all of the Instagram. So it really was something that we really appreciate.
Yeah.
It was fun.
Yeah.
So if people want to take printmaking lessons, they can still go to Art Lab.
Yes, Art Lab has printmaking lessons in the evenings. I think it's Tuesday. If you're a printmaker who already know what
It's
you're
Sage Reynolds. Sage
doing,
Reynolds.
Sage also teaches.
Right there.
Right.
Raise your hand.
What night do you teach?
I teach Tuesday nights, and
Okay.
it's actually relief printing.
Relief printing on Tuesday nights. And if you're an experienced printer, you can come on Thursdays from 10:30 to 1:30. I do monitor that at the Art Lab, Open Studio.
Is your class running?
No.
And
Oh, I was gonna say, because you were gonna be teaching a was it monotype class?
Monoprint.
monoprint. So if you're interested in monoprint,
In your
then
direction.
Yeah,
Oh, the
leave your
fly?
name.
Oh, I thought you were just leaving.
I was directing.
if you're interested, see us and maybe we can fill some of those classes.
It's a great thing to study, even if you don't have a drawing background or an art background, because it's process. When you work with children, which I do, it gives you something, like you could just play with color. You could play games with it and end up learning a lot about the materials and then finding what niche fits your style of art making.
Actually, the monoprint, Dennis was teaching, right now Jason's lab, Dennis was teaching in my senior center in 2018 and 2019, which is great because we have a 90 years old senior was participating in his class. And because of motor skill, getting a little difficult to do the small things, but we have 94 years old at the time. She was pretty bold and become almost like a Picasso. she's blossoming. The printing part he was using, he was printing for them, but it's become really, it's just blossoming like a like showing. It doesn't have to. She can just paint the way she wants, but printing into the beautiful abstract paint. So I thought it was very great. Not exactly monoprint. It wasn't not exactly necessary to have a prior experience.
Yeah.
This become like feel like artist. Yeah, like lots of seniors are using coloring, which is a really very disapproved, and so I thought monoprint was very great tool for myself.
Well, I guess,
Yeah.
well, thank you all. There's refreshments to that.